Patricia's HOA threw their biggest party ever on my ranch pond, until the water started disappearing. While 100 trespassers watched in horror, their floating stage sank into mud and their festival became a swamp. They forgot one crucial detail. My grandfather engineered every drop of that water. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My name is Jake Morrison and I own a 40-acre ranch on the outskirts of Millbrook County. For 25 years, my family had lived peacefully on this land, raising cattle and growing crops. The crown jewel of our property was a beautiful 3-acre pond that my grandfather had built in 1952. That pond wasn't just water, it was our family's heart. My kids learned to swim there. We fished for bass and catfish on summer evenings. During droughts, it kept our cattle alive. The pond was fed by an underground spring and controlled by a system of gates and channels that my grandfather had engineered with careful precision. Everything changed when Sunset Hills Development bought the land next to us and built their fancy subdivision. Suddenly we had neighbors, lots of them. The HOA president, Patricia Whitman, made it clear from day one that she considered our ranch an eyesore that lowered their property values. "Mr. Morrison," she said during our first meeting, "we need to discuss your situation." "What situation?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Your livestock, your farm equipment, the smell, the noise. This is a residential area now. Ma'am, my family has been here for 70 years. You built houses next to a working ranch." Patricia's smile was as cold as winter frost. "Times change, Mr. Morrison. Perhaps it's time you considered selling." That was the beginning of 3 years of harassment. Code violations for agricultural odors. Noise complaints about roosters crowing at dawn. Demands that I install fencing to block their view of my cattle. But the pond became their obsession. The pond sat about 50 yards from the property line between my ranch and their subdivision. From their backyards, residents could see the water sparkling in the sunlight, surrounded by old oak trees and cattails. Patricia started bringing potential buyers to look at houses, always stopping at the fence to point at my pond. "Imagine if that beautiful water feature was part of our community amenities," she would say. "It would be perfect for swimming, boating, and recreation." The hints became demands. The demands became threats. "Mr. Morrison, that pond is wasted on cattle," Patricia told me during one of her uninvited visits. "Our children need a place to swim and play. The pond is on my private property. It's not a public swimming pool. But surely you could be reasonable. We could work out some kind of arrangement." I knew what she meant. They wanted access to my pond without paying for it or taking responsibility for maintaining it. When I refused, Patricia escalated her campaign. She filed complaints with the county claiming my pond was a mosquito breeding ground and a drowning hazard for children. She demanded environmental inspections and safety reviews. Every inspection found the pond perfectly maintained and legally compliant. But the harassment continued. Then Patricia made her biggest mistake. It was a Saturday in July when I noticed cars parked along the road near my property. I thought maybe Patricia was showing houses again, but something felt different. I grabbed my binoculars and climbed up to the barn loft where I could see over the trees to the pond. What I saw made my blood boil. 30 people from the subdivision were having a pool party at My Pond. They had brought rafts, inner tubes, coolers, and even a small dock system they'd somehow installed overnight. Children were swimming while adults lounged on inflatable chairs, drinking beer and playing music. They had cut my fence and walked right onto my property like they owned it. I called the sheriff immediately. "This is Jake Morrison at the Old Morrison Ranch. I have trespassers on my property holding some kind of party at my pond." 20 minutes later, Deputy Martinez arrived. We walked down to the pond together, where Patricia was directing the setup of what looked like a semi-permanent beach party. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property," Deputy Martinez announced. Patricia turned around with a confident smile. "Officer, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. We have permission to use this recreational facility." "Permission from who?" "The property management company handles these arrangements." I stepped forward. "Deputy, I own this land. I never gave permission for any of this." Patricia's confidence cracked slightly. "Mr. Morrison, surely you can't object to children having innocent fun." "I object to people breaking my fence and trespassing on my property." Deputy Martinez was taking notes. "Ma'am, I need to see documentation of your permission to be here." Patricia couldn't produce any documents because none existed. She had simply decided that my pond should be their playground and acted accordingly. "Everyone needs to leave immediately," Deputy Martinez announced. "This is private property and you're all trespassing." The family started packing up, but slowly, as if they were being kicked out of a public park rather than caught trespassing on someone's ranch. Patricia wasn't finished. "Mr. Morrison, this is exactly the kind of selfishness that's ruining this community. You have all this space and water that you're not even using properly. Ma'am, I use this pond to water my cattle and irrigate my crops. It's not a recreational facility." Well, maybe it should be. That night, Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the pond situation. I wasn't invited, but my neighbor Bill filled me in on the details. They voted to pursue legal options for community access to underutilized water resources, Bill told me. "Patricia thinks she can force you to share the pond." I laughed, but not because it was funny. She's going to learn that property rights still mean something in this country. Patricia hired a lawyer who specialized in creative property law solutions. They filed 3 separate lawsuits against me. 1. A claim that my pond created an attractive nuisance that endangered neighborhood children. 2. An environmental lawsuit claiming the pond violated wetland protection laws. 3. A property rights challenge arguing that water resources should be shared with the community. The legal fees started mounting. Every court appearance cost money I didn't have much of. Patricia and her HOA had deep pockets from their monthly dues, while I was fighting with savings from cattle sales. But they made one crucial mistake. They got greedy. Patricia's lawyer filed a motion claiming that my pond was actually a natural water feature that predated property lines. They argued that the original land surveys were incorrect and that the pond should be considered community property. This was completely false. My grandfather had built the pond using diverted creek water and his own engineering. Every document from 1952 onward showed the pond as part of our property. But here's what Patricia didn't know. My grandfather hadn't just built a pond. He had built a controlled water system with gates, channels, and drainage that could be completely managed from a control station near our barn. If they wanted to claim the pond was natural, they were about to learn exactly how unnatural it really was. I spent weeks studying my grandfather's original blueprints and engineering notes. The pond was fed by a diverted creek that flowed through underground pipes and channels. The water level was maintained by a series of gates that could redirect the flow back to the creek's original path. My grandfather had designed the system so that during drought years, he could lower the pond level to conserve water for irrigation. During flood years, he could drain excess water to prevent overflow damage. I had never used the drainage system because it had never been necessary. The pond maintained itself perfectly for 70 years. But now I had a reason. Patricia and her HOA were planning another community gathering at my pond for the 4th of July weekend. This time, they were inviting people from outside the subdivision, a full-scale festival on my property without my permission. I decided it was time to give them a demonstration of exactly how natural my pond really was. The HOA promoted their Sunset Hills Community Water Festival 4 weeks. They rented professional equipment, a large floating stage, multiple rafts, diving platforms, and even a water slide that attached to my dock. They sold tickets. Actual tickets to a festival on my property. I called the sheriff again, but this time Deputy Martinez had different news. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry, but Patricia's lawyer filed an injunction claiming ongoing legal disputes over pond access. We can't intervene while the case is pending. So they can just trespass because they filed a lawsuit? It's complicated." The judge ordered both parties to maintain the status quo until the case is resolved. That night I made my decision. If the law couldn't protect my property rights, I would use my grandfather's engineering to protect them myself. July 4th dawned sunny and hot, perfect weather for a water festival. By 10 a.m., nearly 100 people had gathered at my pond. The floating stage was loaded with speakers and DJ equipment. Kids were already swimming while adults set up elaborate picnic spreads. Patricia stood on the main raft like a queen surveying her kingdom, directing the setup and welcoming guests to our beautiful community water feature. I watched from the barn loft as more people arrived. Food trucks parked along the road. Someone had hired a photographer to document the event. A local news crew even showed up to cover the community celebration. At 2 p.m., when the party was in full swing, I walked down to the control station my grandfather had built near the barn. My grandfather's control system was beautifully simple. 3 main gates controlled water flow into the pond. 3 drainage gates controlled water flow out of the pond. By closing the inlet gates and opening the drainage gates, the pond could be completely drained in approximately 4 hours. I had tested the system the week before, using just one drainage gate to lower the water level by 6 inches. It worked perfectly. Now, with 100 trespassers enjoying their festival on my property, I decided to give them a full demonstration. I closed all 3 inlet gates first, stopping the flow of fresh water into the pond. Then I opened the first drainage gate. The water level began dropping immediately, but slowly enough that nobody at the party noticed yet. Patricia was giving a speech on the main raft about community cooperation and shared resources. The irony was perfect. After 30 minutes, I opened the second drainage gate. Now people started noticing. The water level was dropping fast enough that the floating stage was getting close to the muddy bottom. Kids on inner tubes were scraping against underwater roots and rocks. "Hey, is the water getting lower?" someone called out. Patricia looked around nervously. "I'm sure it's just the tide." "Tide? Ma'am, this is a pond." I opened the third drainage gate. With all 3 drainage gates open, the pond was emptying like a giant bathtub. The water level dropped 2 feet in the first hour, stranding the floating stage and forcing swimmers to stay close to the muddy banks. Patricia was frantically calling people on her phone, trying to figure out what was happening. The DJ packed up his equipment as the stage tilted dangerously toward the muddy bottom. "This is some kind of sabotage," Patricia announced to the confused crowd. "Someone is deliberately draining our pond." "Actually, it's my pond," I said, walking down from the barn with my grandfather's engineering blueprints in hand. The crowd turned to stare at me. Patricia's face went through several shades of red. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I'm demonstrating that this pond isn't a natural water feature. It's an engineered irrigation system built by my grandfather in 1952. Every drop of water is controlled by mechanical systems on my property." The water was now 4 feet below normal level. The main raft sat tilted in the mud like a beached whale. Kids who had been swimming were now standing in ankle-deep muddy water, looking for their lost toys. "This is illegal," Patricia screamed. "You can't just drain a public water resource." "Ma'am, this is private property. You're the one who's here illegally." The local news crew was filming everything. This wasn't the community celebration story they had expected to cover. By 6 p.m., the pond was empty except for a small channel of flowing water following its original creek path. What had been a beautiful 3-acre lake was now a muddy basin filled with confused fish, scattered trash from the party, and about 50 very expensive pieces of floating equipment sitting uselessly in the muck. The sight was devastating for the festival goers, but educational for everyone else. "You see," I explained to the news crew, "my grandfather diverted Morrison Creek to create this pond for agricultural use. The water flows through underground pipes from the creek, fills the pond and can be diverted back to the creek when needed. It's completely artificial." Patricia was standing knee-deep in mud, trying to salvage the floating stage that had cost the HOA $3,000 to rent. "This is destruction of community property," she yelled. "Patricia, this is my property. You're trespassing, remember?" The crowd was dispersing rapidly. Nobody wanted to stick around for the cleanup, and most people were starting to realize they'd been tricked into believing they had rights to someone else's property. The food trucks left. The photographer packed up. The DJ was demanding payment for his ruined equipment. Patricia and about 20 HOA members were left standing in the mud, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of party equipment that was now covered in pond muck. "You'll pay for this," Patricia threatened. "We'll sue you for everything you have. Good luck with that. You just held an illegal festival on my property, charged admission, and destroyed my irrigation system. I think you're the ones who'll be paying." The video of the pond draining went viral within hours. HOA Karen gets stuck in mud after illegal party was shared millions of times across social media. Patricia's lawsuit against me collapsed immediately. It's hard to claim water rights to a pond when you're on video watching it disappear at the flip of a switch. But my countersuit against the HOA was just getting started. I sued for trespassing and property damage, theft of water resources, a commercial use of private property without permission, a destruction of agricultural infrastructure, illegal fees and court costs. The evidence was overwhelming. They had cut my fence, held unauthorized events on my property, charged admission to use my pond, and caused thousands of dollars in damage to my irrigation system. Patricia tried to claim they had implied permission, because I hadn't physically stopped previous smaller gatherings. But the video evidence showed her explicitly being told to leave by law enforcement and then organizing an even bigger event. The HOA's insurance company settled out of court for $85,000 rather than face a trial they couldn't win. Patricia's humiliation in the mud marked the end of her reign as HOA president. The video of her standing knee-deep in muck, screaming about community property, that didn't exist, became a symbol of HOA overreach. The Sunset Hills residents were furious about the legal bills, the settlement payment, and the national embarrassment. Patricia was voted out of office in an emergency election and replaced by a board that focused on actual community needs instead of harassing neighbors. The new HOA president, Maria Santos, came to visit me personally. "Mr. Morrison, we want to apologize for what happened. Patricia's actions were completely inappropriate and don't represent our community values." "I appreciate that, Maria. We'd also like to discuss a legitimate arrangement if you're interested. Some of our residents would love fishing access to your pond, and we understand there should be proper compensation and agreements." This was exactly the kind of respectful approach that could have prevented the whole mess. We worked out a fair agreement. For a reasonable annual fee, HOA residents could purchase fishing licenses for my pond. They had to follow my rules, respect my property, and understand that it was a working agricultural facility first and a recreational area second. The arrangement worked perfectly for everyone. After the draining incident, people became fascinated with my grandfather's engineering system. Local colleges brought students to study the pond as an example of sustainable water management. The Extension Office asked me to write an article about the system for their agricultural newsletter. The County Historical Society wanted to document the engineering as an example of Depression-era innovation. I started giving tours to engineering students and farmers who wanted to understand how the water control system worked. My grandfather's 1952 blueprints became teaching materials for modern irrigation design. The pond itself recovered beautifully. I refilled it over several days, and within a month, the fish population was back to normal. The cattails and water plants grew back stronger than before. But the most satisfying part was watching Patricia's house go up for sale 6 months later. She couldn't handle living next to the pond that had humiliated her in front of the entire internet. The video of the pond draining became a classic example of property rights and consequences. It was shown in law schools as a case study in trespassing and water rights. Business schools used it to teach about the importance of understanding your legal position before taking action. I received hundreds of messages from people dealing with similar HOA problems. Many shared their own stories of being bullied by power-hungry board members who forgot that private property rights still matter. The incident sparked conversations about HOA reform and the limits of community association authority. Several states passed laws clarifying that HOAs cannot claim ownership of private property just because it's visible from their neighborhood. Patricia tried to rebuild her reputation by moving to a different state and getting involved in local politics. But the internet never forgets, and her mud-covered image followed her everywhere. 5 years have passed since the Great Draining, as the neighbors now call it. The pond is more beautiful than ever, and the legitimate fishing program has created genuine friendships between ranch life and suburban life. Kids from the subdivision come for educational tours about sustainable farming and water management. Some have even helped with cattle feeding and learned about agricultural life. The HOA has become a model of reasonable governance, focusing on actual community needs instead of harassing neighbors. Property values in Sunset Hills actually increased once Patricia's reign of terror ended. Patricia's replacement as HOA president understood something Patricia never grasped. Good neighbors ask permission, respect boundaries, and offer fair compensation for shared benefits. The mud stains eventually washed out of the floating equipment, but the stains on Patricia's reputation were permanent. She learned too late that other people's property isn't a public resource just because you want it to be. People often ask me if I regret draining the pond and humiliating all those families. They wonder if I could have handled the situation differently. My answer is always the same. I tried reasonable approaches for 3 years. I explained property rights, offered legitimate arrangements, and asked them to respect boundaries. Patricia responded with lawsuits, trespassing, and theft. When someone steals from you and then sues you for the right to keep stealing, reasonable approaches have failed. Sometimes the only language bullies understand is consequences. The pond draining wasn't just about water, it was about the principle that private property means something. It was about showing that engineering beats entitlement, and that preparation defeats presumption. Patricia assumed my pond was just a natural lake that happened to be on my property. She never bothered to research the history, understand the engineering, or respect the legal reality. Her ignorance became her downfall. Today, my ranch operates exactly as it did before the subdivision was built, but with better community relationships and additional income from the fishing program. The pond serves its original purposes: watering cattle, irrigating crops, and providing a peaceful place for my family to fish and reflect. But now it also serves as a teaching tool about water management, property rights, and the importance of respecting your neighbors. Patricia's replacement, Maria Santos, has become a friend. She understands that rural and suburban communities can coexist peacefully when both sides show mutual respect. The viral video of the draining still gets shared every few months, usually with captions like, "Don't mess with engineers," or, "This is what happens when HOA Karens meet reality." But the real satisfaction isn't the internet fame or the settlement money. It's the knowledge that my grandfather's engineering principles still work perfectly after 70 years, and that sometimes the best way to teach someone about water rights is to show them what happens when the water disappears. The pond that Patricia thought she could claim as community property turned out to be the instrument of her humiliation. The water she took for granted revealed itself to be completely under my control. In the end, gravity always wins, engineering beats entitlement, and property rights matter more than community demands. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people learn the hard way that they don't own what they think they own. And sometimes, the most effective way to defend your property is to show everyone exactly how much control you really have over it. The water came back. Patricia's authority never did. That's the kind of engineering legacy my grandfather would have been proud of.